Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Opeth, The Last Will and Testament. It's been a long time since I've properly reviewed an Opeth album. I thought I had reviewed them in 2019, but turns out I skipped that album as I have the majority of their prog rock era in the 2010s. I don't know, in comparison with their run from Still Life, which I still hold as their best, to Damnation, I just don't have the desire to go to the backwards-looking prog rock that didn't feel all that special or gripping to me. Now, since then, it's been 5 years, they've replaced their drummer, they left Nuclear Blast, and reportedly this was a return to their progressive death metal roots. I mean, it's certainly been getting the critical acclaim from the metal circuit, who have been desperately longing for that shift, along with this being their shortest album since Damnation. So all that were good signs, although I wasn't about to get my hopes that high, and that might have been partially for the best, because Opeth brought a bit of a curveball here, a narrative-driven concept album featuring the reading of a wealthy man's will and the drama that might ensue from it, which Mikhail Åkerfeldt has described as being partially inspired by Succession. So in essence, and there's going to be spoilers coming, just forewarning here, we have your stereotypical cruel old patriarch looking to pass down his inheritance and family legacy to either his twins or a very sickly younger daughter, but then it turns out said daughter was conceived with the family maid and will be getting the majority of the inheritance because it turns out the twins, they were illegitimate because the patriarch wasn't really their father, but instead a low-born servant in the house, and then the album ends with the revelation that the sickly daughter, well, she wasn't legitimate either because the maid conceived with another man and the patriarch turned out to be ultimately sterile. Now, for everybody's benefit, I'm going to set aside any comparison to Succession. So many of that show's societal themes about late capitalism and the media and internecine family infighting, they really don't manifest here that well. It'd be an unfair comparison. We don't get many personal details about the twins or the younger daughter at all, or the relationships to each other or their father, because the structure of reading through the will isolates so much of the perspective to that patriarch, where if there is a thematic arc, it's how so much of the presumed legacy of great men winds up impotent, ossified, crumbling into ash, built on lies and concealment, where in the final conclusion it feels incredibly nihilistic and how little any of the pretense here seem to matter. But it's a thematic conclusion that's kind of betrayed by the album's structure and framing that lodges so much of its importance in the reading of that will. It places so much authorial weight on that cruel patriarch and his historical import and the disgraceful secrets required to maintain that. So yeah, on some level it falls into a similar trap to Succession for those who watched it for charisma and pithy melodrama rather than acknowledging the consequences of all those rich assholes' actions, wanting to interrogate power but still intrinsically valuing its importance in society, telling the children to value and bear its weight from a legacy ultimately revealed to be ash. I mean, this is where those children's perspective would have been invaluable in actually selling it or grounding the emotional drama. But if anything, it feels even more sterile and reserved than that, where you can see more attention paid to the mechanics of the storyline rather than any emotional underpinning, at least outside of the patriarch's point of view. Åkerfeldt has said in interviews that the concept and lyrics came to him before the music, and yeah, you can really hear it in the stiffness of the presentation, or how the songs don't have much in the way of hooks, feeling more reminiscent of a one-act theater play than self-contained entities that can stand on their own, which, if anything, places it much closer to the progressive tradition than aligning with even that old metal sound, even if sonically they're somewhat heading back in that direction. For one, there's easily as much clean singing on this album as there are the death growls. The production remains as clean as really any of their previous projects, and while it does feel well balanced in the low end, and there are a couple impressive solos, like the woodwinds and shredding on section 4, or the synth and guitar solo on section 6, and some of the heavier riffs help it feel more dynamic, like the sharper haunted groove on section 3, or that gallop on section 6, I'd really struggle struggle to say that many of the melodic moments are strong enough to punch above the weight of this narrative, or even feel all that visceral or cultivate a distinctive atmosphere or feel that memorable. It's a shame A Story Never Told, the closing track, is tied to the most frustrating swerve in the entire narrative. It's probably the strongest tune on the entire album. But again, that might be the larger root of the problem. This project seems utterly averse to strong melodic hooks or a chorus, and while progressive rock and metal's usual excuse is you don't need them, you're above them, reconciling that Opeth's best music often had those melodic foundations and they seem thrown aside in favor of the narrative structure, it's, well, awkward to say the least. But in short, I might not be surprised by all the critical acclaim in rock and metal circles that's being thrown at this album for being the best Opeth album in years. And by that I mean the most metal to the majority of old school fans. You're pretty transparent here. But if you dig even a little deeper, you're gonna find a project just as beholden to the concept as any overworked prog rock album that values that concept over everything else. And when I'm nowhere near as impressed by said concept in the execution, the rest of the album loses a lot of luster. That's not saying it's bad by any means, it's certainly agreeable. Bringing back the prog death metal side of this band has raised the floor, but it also feels a little bit too impressed with its construction to recognize the visceral and emotional intensity to come with this sort of family drama, and dovetailing into a nihilistic final twist really killed my impetus to revisit it much. I just don't like the ending. In other words, yes, it's fine enough, it's decent, but if this is being cited as the return to form, well, when an album all about deconstructing and demolishing legacy is embraced by the fandom ravenous for that hierarchy, continuity, and legacy, that might be a crueler irony than anything here. All I'm saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Look folks, I really wanted to like this album. I'm really disappointed that I don't, but again, it doesn't stick with me. The production's fine, but I don't think there's a lot of moments that go above and beyond. And the narrative is not getting the sort of attention to the fine details that it should. They really shouldn't have made that comparison to Succession, which is one of my favorite TV shows. But again, it is what it is. Let's try to argue that out properly in the comments and try to be civil down there. I don't have high expectations. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, or just want to get stuff on my schedule for next year, or just argue with me on my Discord, link to my Patreon is there, as well as YouTube memberships. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.